Hi guys, just before we start the episode today, whatever platform you are listening to this on, whether it be on the podcast, Apple Podcast, YouTube, whatever it is, please support it. Please like, subscribe, whatever you can do. We want to reach as many people as possible. So please do that and we'll get right into the episode. Welcome to another episode of the Chronic Comeback Podcast. Today in this episode, we have Lauren Stoney. I'm really excited to have her on and share her story today. Just to give you a bit of a brief introduction to her story, having entered the world of marketing as a driven and ambitious professional, Lauren experienced firsthand the effects of living life at 100 miles an hour, living every day from a work hard, play hard mentality. And that definitely resonates with me. It wasn't long before she suffered the effects of burnout, facing the diagnosis of a lifelong autoimmune condition, Hashimoto's disease. Her future seemed bleak, with rapidly deteriorating health, the potential loss of her career, and a social life that was drawing to a close. But in 2016, she discovered the lightning process, which we discussed with other people on this podcast before. And from that point, she never looked back. She rediscovered her career, she rediscovered her health, and most importantly, she rediscovered her life. So really excited to get into this today. How are you doing, Lauren?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
No worries. And always good to have a fellow Brit on. I'm in Bali at the moment, so there's a lot of Australian accents. So not that there's anything wrong with Australian accents. Cool. Well, if we could go back before 2016, and just to understand a little bit more about what life was like before then, and did you? I mean, I've alluded to it in my introduction that, you were living quite which is, you said before that there'd be a lot of parallels between your story and other people's story. I mean, I think there's a parallel between my story, work hard, play hard. At that point, could you see telltale signs of were you always a healthy person? Was there stuff going on? Could you tell us a little bit about what life was like before that point?
Yeah, I mean, excuse me. I mean, as far as seeing the signs, absolutely not. I didn't see any signs coming at all. Very blissfully unaware of the path that I was going down. I think, I've always been the sort of person who's very driven, very ambitious, as you've sort of referred to as well. And the time when I've always been very perfectionist as well, I always had very high standards. And so that was never a problem really for me until there was a certain period in my life where a certain number of life events happened. And, the classic case, which is true for a lot of people I work with as well, it's one thing after the other, and that kind of chronic stress thing that sort of kicks in. So at the time I was working every hour under the sun. I was going to the gym probably twice a day at some point. It was a bit excessive. And my manager, I always remember my manager telling me, you're heading for burnout, but I really didn't believe it at the time. So it was only when these kind of life events hit that actually it really had a big impact, I would say. And it wasn't until further down the line I obviously really realized what was going on.
And sorry, so this was it was in 2016 you had these life events, or was it before, or?
No, it was a couple of years before. So I sort of had quite a big family trauma in my mid-20s, and I said I left quite a big mark on my life. And then not long after that, I split with my ex of sort of 9 years. So that was quite a big thing. And then I had a sort of series of kind of other sort of life events. I had a stalker at one point. That was fun. Wow. Some issues with my my health, which they weren't like health issues and the kind of issues that I'd experienced further down the line, but they were issues that weren't taken seriously by the medical professionals that I was dealing with at the time. So that later led to complications. And alongside of that, that also created the start of that kind of mistrust and resentment towards the medical world. Now, I would just say that obviously I see the value in the medical interventions, and I think it's absolutely crucial. But I'm aware that for a lot of people who I work with in my own journey, there's a lot of things that could have been done differently, should I say, that may not have led to the outcomes they did. So there's a lot of, psychologically, there's a lot of stuff going on as well around that.
Well, I think it's a shame, isn't it, that you we have these instances that make us mistrust a system, and then it can make you mistrust something that's actually good for you in the future. And I think I see that quite a lot on this podcast, actually, with people maybe getting a bit triggered by people thinking that some of the guests are maybe like selling a program to them because they've seen they've spent money on things before. And I think it's difficult when you're in this you've got like chronic health issues and you've spent a lot of money, or you've been used to getting ignored by doctors. That's like trauma in itself. And it sounds like that's what happened for you. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, obviously, there's so much I could say around that, because obviously in terms of the brain will create beliefs out of what happens in our life, right? And this is the thing, this is where we get stuck with illness, because things like this happen and we then create a belief that we can't trust our body, we can't trust the medical world, we can't trust ourselves, or so there's lots of and the resentment will feed into that. But as far as sort of the kind of seeking help is concerned, that was something that, again, like you, I had a very long journey with that, and I went from doctor to doctor only to be told nothing was wrong with me. I tried I had every test under the sun, nothing came back. Obviously, eventually I did get a diagnosis, but again, like you and a lot of other people, I spent thousands of pounds on my health by the time I actually got that kind of turnaround in my journey.
So just dialing it back a bit, like what first happened from a symptom point of view? What was going on in your life? What were the symptoms? And did it happen really quickly, or was it over a longer period of time?
It was over a longer period of time, I would say. I think there were a few key points when I realized things weren't right. Like you, funnily enough, I went to Australia to travel as a way of, at the time, I thought I was just stressed. So I tried to escape that by going to Australia and traveling. That was actually the point at which things got a lot worse. And I do remember one key point where I'd already been trying to get help. I'd been seeing a naturopath and getting acupuncture and all that kind of stuff, And there's just one point when I'd rocked up at work and I felt like I'd been hit by a bus, and it was just the start of the day. A lot of the symptoms that I was sort of feeling were things like, like intense fatigue, brain fog, paresthesia. I hadn't had a period in 2 years, digestive things, all sorts of things. But the one key moment was when I remember just sitting in the office and I was just doing pure plain data entry, and I couldn't remember what I was doing. And I just felt like, I remember going into the toilets and just breaking down into tears at that point. And I did actually call my nan and granddad, because I was very close to them, because I didn't really know what was happening to me. It felt like a very scary place. It was sort of like, who am I becoming? Because I felt like a shadow of myself. And I'd gone from being this person who was really driven, ambitious, very extroverted, very out there, very sociable, to complete opposite. And I really felt like, I felt like a shadow of myself, and that your future starts to close in on you at that point. So that was the key point, which I really felt quite broken, I would say.
And what was it? I always like to ask this question because I think it's different for a lot of different people. But what was it like in terms of like the relationships around you at that point? Like, were your friends and family, were they understanding? Did it make you feel a little bit more isolated from them?
Well, this was the worst thing, actually, and I'm sure you hear this a lot because it's something that I work with a lot of people. But it's that sense of not feeling heard. So that was the worst thing for me. That was probably one of the worst things. So number one, being a shadow of myself. Number two, not feeling heard by people around me. So my very, very close family were, they did the best they could to understand. But it is very hard for people when you're living with an invisible illness, for people to see that and to get it, especially if they haven't gone through that themselves. So there was a lot of, it's all in your head, or there's nothing wrong with you, from certain people. And that in itself was pretty triggering. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even for someone to say those words, that can leave an imprint on you. I guess so you started getting these symptoms, you realized something was like pretty badly wrong. Did you go to like a normal general practitioner, like a normal doctor, and they were just, what happened with the initial doctor merry-go-round, as I like to call it?
Yeah, that's a good way of terming it. Well, I was traveling at the time, so I went from doctor to doctor to doctor while I was traveling, because I had sort of I don't know what I had at the time, but I don't know, it was health cover or something. But anyway, had loads and loads of tests, nothing came back. Every time I was told there was absolutely nothing wrong with me. And then when I came back, I had to end up having a crash. So I went to China whilst I was traveling, and I had a major health crash out there and had to come home early. So then I went back to the doctors in the UK, and again, there was, nothing wrong with me. I then I moved to Brighton, and I had a new doctor here, and it was like, it was a really good doctor's surgery. They have like alternative health things there as well. And I remember feeling really sorry for my poor doctor, actually, because at that point I was just going back and forth, like, potentially 2-3 times a week at that point. It was so bad. And eventually I got referred to an endocrinologist. And that was the point at which I ended up getting diagnosed with this condition, Hashimoto's disease. And I really remember quite vividly the moment in his office when he told me that. And it just felt completely, it was like I'd been given a life sentence at that point, because I remember saying to him, well, because I'm used to sort of being able to fix things, right? My pattern is that, right, okay, what can we do? Let's sort it out. So I said, okay, so what do we do? How do I sort this out? How do I fix it? And he said, you don't, you have this condition for life. Like, you just have to live with it. And that's the point at which I left the hospital, and I just, again, lots of tears. I remember breaking down into tears on the phone to my mum at that point, because I just felt like my life was over.
And just for those who don't know, like, what we have had a number of guests actually with Hashimoto's, but what does that, is it so it's an autoimmune issue, it's the essentially the immune system or the body attacking itself, but how does that actually manifest?
It's the thyroid, so it affects your thyroid basically, which is responsible, I believe, for like metabolism and things like that.
Yeah.
And so at that point you get a prescription for thyroxine. That's kind of like how they typically treat Hashimoto's. I'm not even sure they use the term Hashimoto's anymore, but that is what it was diagnosed as when I was given that.
Right. Okay. And I see, I can't remember. Is it possible to treat it successfully, as in you're like symptom free with medication, or is it just something that's just kind of papering over the cracks?
Yeah, exactly. That would be my feelings towards it. I mean, I think I was desperate not to go on the medication, and I never did in the end. And I should say that my levels were borderline, so I wasn't like really extreme, my TH levels, whatever they're called. But from my understanding, thyroxine doesn't necessarily always remove the symptoms either. It just kind of keeps you stable, basically.
Right.
Or stops further degeneration. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, it's not something that you can really recover from as far as medicine's concerned.
It's interesting that you would, because I've been on a long journey of being someone who, if someone offered me some medication to get rid of something or to make it not as bad, I would just take it. Whereas now I'm like the complete opposite. Like I just think I don't believe in that as much anymore. And maybe I'm gone too far the other way, and I'm just trying to get my body in a position where it can heal itself. How were you in that? Was that something you've always kind of like a mindset you've always tried to have, like stay away from medication? Why did you choose not to take the medication?
It's a good question, actually. It's so far back, and I haven't really, revisiting this stuff. I think I've always wanted to, I've never really liked putting stuff into my body, I guess. I haven't always been that adverse to it, but I think there's a couple of things, actually. I think on the one hand, the negative experience that I had. So one of the negative experience I had previously prior to getting ill was that I had some problems with my hip, which I went back and forth to doctors about it, and was told there was nothing wrong. And they gave me naproxen. And I started to get stomach pains when I took the naproxen. So I went back to my doctor and I told her this, and she said, carry on taking the naproxen. So I carried on taking the naproxen, and then I ended up with stomach bleeding. And I felt that had quite a big impact in my future health issues. I also had some issues with other things. So I think that, again, when I talk about the beliefs that come out of these experiences, I've certainly developed a belief that, medicine isn't necessarily to be trusted all the time. And that's my belief with certain things. I'm not saying that's true, and I think it's very important, but where I can avoid it, I think that's important. The other side of it is that I didn't want to be reliant on something else. I wanted to know that I could rely on my body to be healthy, because I'd always been really fit, always been really healthy. I had a really strong belief around that, and I felt very proud of the fact that I was quite fit and healthy. So I didn't want to be what I saw as flawed, I guess. And I felt that if I had to rely on a medicine for that, that it would just kind of reinforce that belief.
Yeah. Okay. And just
necessarily true, by the way, obviously, but that's just how I was feeling at the time, I think.
No, yeah. And to be honest, I agree with pretty much everything you're saying on that. With regards to naproxen, just out of interest, isn't that an antibiotic?
It's an anti-inflammatory, an NSAID.
No, so it's not. Okay, cool. So yeah, I was thinking, why are they giving you an antibiotic for hip pain? Doesn't make any sense. Yeah. Anyway, I got sidetracked. Sorry. So you got the diagnosis. What did you do at that point? So obviously, your world's shattered, and you've got this other view of what life is like now. What was the plan from this point onwards?
Well, I mean, at that point, I'd been signed off. So I'd been taking quite a lot of increasing sick days by that point. And by that point, I had been signed off work for a month. Now, I was in a contract position at that point. So I didn't really have much stability or security around my job. And I literally was ready to hand in my notice. I was like, that's it. I can't function anymore. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can't do my job. I can't see my friends. This is my life. Now, sometime a few months previously, I had met this girl at a meditation center. So I've been meditating like daily, as we all do when we're struggling with these things. And she had been ill with chronic fatigue syndrome for 20 years. And she told me when I first met her that she'd done this thing called the lightning process. And I was like, wow, that sounds amazing. Good for you. Never thought it would really help me because I was like, I'm different to everyone else and all this kind of stuff. But we did go on to become very good friends. And over time, she would keep sort of planting that seed. Lauren, why don't you do the lightning process? I'm like, no, it's not for me. Like, it's too good to be true. I know that you had ME for 20 years, but my thing is different. And, all this kind of stuff. I also felt the kind of pressure of, because I'd seen these kind of like miracle stories about it. And I was like, I'm going to be the one that fails, right? I'm going to be the one that doesn't get the results. Therefore, I don't want to put myself in the line. So I'd held out for a very, very long time because I didn't really believe it worked for me. I also didn't really, although I wanted to believe in the mind-body connection, I believed that other people could achieve things through that. I didn't believe that I could get anything through the mind-body connection. So I was in a pretty bad space mentally at that point in terms of being set up for pursuing something like that. But by the time I got the diagnosis, I was just so desperate that it was like, well, this is my last chance, right? I literally have nothing else to go to. I've tried everything possible. I've got to give it a shot. And so that's when I decided to do the lightning process. And I did it probably about a month after my diagnosis, actually. 27th of September 2016. I still remember the day. And yeah, that's the point at which things changed.
And so I think we've had 2 or 3 people on who did the lightning process, and it's been true to its name from when we've had people on here. It's like it has been incredibly quick, which I think it almost scares people, and in a weird way it scares me as well, because it just feels so crazy that suddenly like all of my problems could be over so quickly. And then I think it starts to play into exactly the reason why I was smiling when you were talking then, because you're saying what both me and everyone who's listening to this, like, it won't work for me. I'm different. It's that. And I know that's like a thought. Ironically, it's the thought that everyone has, that they think they're different. Did it happen really quickly for you? Could you talk us through the process itself?
It's interesting. I know you've interviewed Jodie on here. Actually, me and Jodie get on very well. We talk a lot. So, and we're very similar in our approach and how we talk around this subject, because you're right. I think this is one of the barriers to people doing the lightning process is this idea that, hurrah, 3 days and I'm like miraculously healed. That's not how it works. That is not how it works. And particularly when a lot of people who end up in this position, it's quite controversial, but I say it as a previous client or person who's gone through this process, can be very perfectionist, right? And the perfectionist mindset says, I want everything right now. And if I don't see results instantly, it means it's not working. And that's one of the biggest lessons I've had to learn in my journey, is to just give myself a break and release that pressure. So coming back to your question around, can you get instant results? What I say to everyone, and sorry, but that is just part of obviously how I talk about it, is that I expect people, from having seen a lot of people do the lightning process now on the other side of it, I expect everyone to see some level of change on those 3 days. It could be huge change, but it might be small change. It doesn't really matter, because the point is you then know you can influence it. And that's the thing to take away. So I had a longer journey of the lightning process, and I beat myself up for it so much. And actually that got in the way. The reality is that the majority of people who do the lightning process will have a bit of a longer journey of it, and that's okay. Quick change is absolutely possible, but it's not something that is in the majority, I would say. So yeah, that's kind of my answer to that.
In a weird way, it's kind of comforting, because it puts less pressure on those. It almost just feels like going into something where you actually think, wow, in 3 days I could have made huge steps forward. It's so, I can't think of another way to say it. It's so fucked up that actually that scares you in a weird way, because it's like, oh my God, if it doesn't happen, then what other chance do I have? And so I guess that's what's in a weird way kind of scary about it. So what was so it's a 3-day process, right? Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And did you do it in person in London?
I did it in a place called Henfield, which is just outside of Brighton. So in East, was it West Sussex?
Okay.
Yeah.
For some reason, I just thought it was only in London. And so what, I'm assuming it sounds like you did see some changes, but they weren't like miraculous for you. Could you just talk us through like what happened over those 3 days?
Yeah, and what I would just say, I just want to be clear about what it is. It is a 3-day course, but it's not just a 3-day course. And the reason I just want to emphasize that is because some people get very anxious that they're, and again, this is just for anyone who decides to do it with whoever, you're not abandoned on day 3, right? Because there's a lot of fear around that. And I think it's important to know that there's a lot of support around it. But anyway, so sorry, the question was, what was my journey with it?
Yeah, just in those 3 days, and guess I don't think I'd said it. So anyone who's listening, because we talked a lot about brain retraining on this podcast, like the lightning process is similar in the same kind of ballpark as like DNRS, Gupta, those kind of things, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, if you could just talk us through, what happened over those 3 days, the good and the bad.
So I remember day 1, and obviously every practitioner has their own style, but the one of the things that the lightning process does is it brings a lot of stories, a lot of humor into something that is obviously a very heavy and serious subject, and that's part of its charm, I guess. And I now do the same thing. But I remember on day 1 thinking, this woman is crazy, like, why is she talking about all these things? And obviously it's a bit like a jigsaw. As time goes on, things become a lot more clear and it all sort of comes together. But the good, the bad, and the ugly, I'd say, like, the ugly was that I put so much pressure on myself, because like I said, I wasn't going to have a job. I had to take my last week's worth of holiday in that contract role to be able to do the lightning process and have a week to be able to practice it before going back to work. So, and I was also very afraid of failure anyway. So I think part of the reason I had a slower journey of it is because I was constantly looking for everything that I wasn't achieving. So day 1, day 2, I didn't feel like I really got any changes at all. Day 3, I remember going back on day 3 thinking, shit, I failed. That's it. Like, this isn't for me. And I had so much brain fog at the time that I just didn't really feel like I was absorbing any of the information. But it was right at the end of day 3 where I noticed some change, and I just noticed that I got this kind of like burst of energy. And the week that followed, I remember just going home and I bought some new running shoes. And I didn't, this kind of sounds contradictory, but I bought the running shoes without aspiration. For the first time, I could drive down Brighton Pier, and I could look at runners and think, oh, that's awesome. Like, I'm so happy for them. And I'm really excited to be able to get back running when I'm ready for it, rather than feeling bitter and twisted that there's healthy people out there enjoying their lives. Right. So yeah, I mean, in terms of the actual course itself, it was a bit of a blur because I had so much brain fog. So it's amazing that actually I did get the results I did, to be honest. But
and is it because I guess what confused me so you found that you got like that little bit of energy at the end. Mm-hmm. Had you, when you were doing, I guess you had brain fog, so you might not remember, but when you were doing any of the processes, because I know a lot of the brain retraining stuff is, tapping into feelings and feelings of like joy and visualization of you know, future and past events, all that kind of stuff. Did you actually do well with those parts, and then you felt it was, you know, that then created this this end result of, you know, getting more energy, or was it just a blur and you somehow came out of it with this energy?
So I did one process with my practitioner at the very end that I think definitely made a difference. But that was in my head at the time when I didn't really have the knowledge that I do now, obviously. And at the time, it felt like magic. And I was like, because I still didn't believe in the mind-body connection, right? I was like, I just don't understand how this could have happened. I really don't get it. Whereas now, obviously, knowing what I know, doing what I do, there's a lot of things that go into it. And it's not just one. So like with neuroplasticity, you know, the brain is always processing behind the scenes. So again, when I talk to people who do the lightning process, I often say it's not, you know, you've got the conscious stepping out of the process and actually doing the work. But as soon as you step away from that, it's still going on behind the scenes, along with any other brain training stuff that you do. Like, it's not just active when you're acting it out. It's going to be filtering through. And the more that you chip away at it, the more you're going to see those results. So with the process itself, yes, you can get, and sometimes you'll get an instant like kick out of it. You'll get an instant change. Other times you might have to really plow away at it and keep using it until it just kicks in days, if not weeks later. That's kind of what it feels like.
And so after the process, and I think it was really interesting what you said there about looking at people and being happy for them, as opposed to kind of using that as an example of what you can't have. And I think that's a shift that I've seen in myself, which is interesting. Apart from that, like, what were the other changes that you saw? How long did it take you to, I guess, to try to take us through the nicer part of the story where things started to get a bit better?
So I mean, 3 weeks after I did the lightning process, I got my first period back after 2 years of not having a period. Wow. So for me, that was a really solid evidence of like, this is a really physical change here. That I had quite a lot of brain fog was probably one of the worst symptoms I had, and that kind of cleared a bit more slowly over the course of the year. And the paresthesia kind of went fairly quickly. So yeah, I basically went back to work a week after doing the lightning process. I was still struggling with symptoms at that point, but I had the tools I needed to keep working on it. So I just kept working on it. I started to get back out seeing friends. And I remember, I don't know if she just say that I had dead eyes before, but I just remember seeing a friend at a social event, and she just said, the moment I knew things had changed is I just saw your eyes. And it's like Lauren was back. I could see Lauren again, right? So it just, and you know, that's why I sort of refer to it in my sort of career side of things. I talk about this sense of getting your oomph back. That's the best way I can describe it, because you can work on all the other stuff, but it's that having that sense of you, that spark that makes you. That was the real turning point for me. And as long as I had that helped me to build on everything else. So I mean, about 2 months after the course, I decided to train as a practitioner, because I just thought, well, you just can't put a price on your health and well-being. And this is the single one thing that's made the biggest difference to me. So I basically spent the next year training. I got a job in London. I was commuting to London every day and training and, you know, setting up my business. So it was pretty full on, but it was all achievable. And
so would you say how long, well, just, I guess, just to clarify, would you say now you're kind of, compared to how you were before, like your health, like how would you say it is now?
I thought you were going to ask the classic, how long is it to tick that off?
No. I know better to ask that.
No, I'd say my health's pretty good. I'm pretty happy that I'm still dairy and gluten intolerant, which a lot of people, a lot of my clients, you know, they can shift those things. That's one thing I haven't yet shifted. And I found that a really useful experience, actually, because it's given me a lot of insight into the things that can keep you, you can sort of stop you from moving forward. So I've been able to learn a lot about myself that I've been able to help other people with, obviously. But yeah, other than that, things are pretty good. I feel very much, well, again, classic thing that people say, but I feel like the old me, but better than the old me, much better version.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the dream that everyone, not the dream, because the dream implies it won't happen. The goal that everyone should have, and it's certainly I say it numerous times on here. I don't want to get back what I lost. I want more. Okay, so and in terms of the whole kind of process from you like starting to get symptoms to feeling like you had your oomph back, as you said, like what period of time was that like in total?
Yeah, so that's the time question. It's because a lot of people will say, well, how long is it going to take me to recover? And I know it's sort of, but I mean, from where I did the lightning process in September 2016, and I would say probably like for the first year, I got to like a good sort of, 70-80%, I guess.
Yeah.
And then the next year after that, it's sort of, now I'm pretty happy with where I'm at. So. Yeah.
And sorry, but before 2016, how long were you dealing with
I see.
It was just more the whole process, not pin us down to a time that we can
sure. Yeah. I would say my health started to break down around 2014.
Okay.
So like a four-year journey, I guess.
And in those times, like when did you have times where you just thought, this is going to last forever. I'm not, I can't get out of this. And if so, just because there's a lot of people who will be in that position at the moment. Like, how did you keep going in those times? Like, how did you keep pushing forward and refuse to kind of accept that this was, your reality forever?
Yeah, I absolutely did feel like that. Yeah, it's interesting actually, because the thing that I always say to people is just don't ever, ever lose hope, because that is the one thing that we have. And I always remember one of my clients saying to me, it's not the hope, it's not the despair that kills you, but the hope. But hope is the one thing that we have. And I think, like you said, when you go out and you actively seek those recovery stories, that is what gives you hope. And that's what gives you that belief that you can make a difference. And I think being able to go out there and look at other people who've made changes that were seemingly impossible is the way to do that. It's not what I did. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I knew someone who had got that change, and I did get to the point where, I mean, in the time leading up to it, I guess what kept me going was that need for answers. And I guess that perfectionist side of me. So the perfectionism, like, it's a double-edged sword. Like there's a lot of advantages, I guess. And that need for more kept driving me to just keep searching, keep finding the answers. But yeah, I think the real advice would be to just go out there and seek other examples of people who've made change, and just actively work on your beliefs, inspire yourself.
What's with people you have working with you, or just people you've seen in this space? What's the biggest obstacle you see for people like making progress? I guess a belief that they may have about their own situation, or about the process itself, or something like that.
So to me, the biggest obstacle is the relationship that we have with ourselves. And to me, there's two things, and they're very much intertwined, is being hard on yourself and only seeing evidence of what you're not doing, which is basically perfectionism. And I talk about perfectionism a lot because it's played such a massive part in my journey. And I never realized it until a lot later down the line. I find a lot of people, again, that I work with they'll say, I'm not perfectionist. And then by the end of it, like, actually, maybe I am. Because when you're perfectionist, you find the holes in absolutely everything. And that doesn't just extend to your achievements at work or in your career, but it also extends to your body and what your body's not doing right, and what you're not doing well, and what successes you're not getting, so you might notice that you've got 5% more energy one day, but actually your brain attends to everything else. Or it's not, and that's not to say that health issues are in your head. They're absolutely not. They're 100% physical, but obviously the brain and the body are always talking. And if you're waging a war against yourself, how's the body going to react to that? You're always going to be in conflict. And this is why I have a very strong belief that autoimmune conditions, your immune system is attacking your body. Like it just makes sense. Yeah. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
Well, it almost seems like when you're kind of like looking for, because I was literally about to say, I don't think I'm a perfectionist.
I bet you any money you are.
But in the sense that Well, if you ask like a few people that I know, like, because I always like when I'm doing work, I will actually hand something in that is an 8 out of 10 because I don't think the extra time that you spend on it to get it to
Yeah,
a 8.5 is worth it. Because if someone accepts it, so I think I'm good with that. However, when you started talking about assessing all the things that are going wrong as opposed to right with my health, I definitely am that. And do you think that plays into the whole your limbic system being kind of on high alert because you're just trying to spot danger at every turn?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, we have our brain will have lots of signatures, right? Neurologically, we have signatures. And so, for example, if you experience pain and you have a perfectionist pattern where nothing is ever enough, or like, I should be doing this, I'm a bad person because I haven't done this yet, then those pathways are going to be firing at the same time. And in the end, what will happen is they will trigger each other off. So the perfectionism pathway will trigger off the pain pathway and vice versa. So it is a really damaging pattern. And I think perfectionism, if anyone is working on health, just if you know that you're a perfectionist, work on that, absolutely, because you will always, it's just not conducive to getting the changes that you want at all.
Sounds like I'm a perfectionist, but without the benefits. I'm a perfectionist in the bad way. In terms of like the actual process itself, I've talked about this so many times on the podcast, so people will get bored of me mentioning it, but hey ho, I'm going to bring it up again. I have a hell of a lot of problems with tapping into like feelings, and I think I also have problems with visualization. I think people then message me and say, oh, there's an actual condition, which means people can't visualize. I don't think that's the problem, because I can definitely visualize things. Like I can picture things in my head and stuff like that. I think it's just more that I hear these people and they say, I know I was taken to this place where I can smell the smell, I can taste the taste. And for me, I can just about picture something, and then something else will pop into my head, and it's just like not very clear. And I certainly can't tap into the feeling of that moment. And so then, because I can't do that, it then starts this like cycle of like self-sabotage, because then I'm like, I can't do this. And I'm kind of just doing it for the sake of doing it because I know I need to do it. And do you know what I mean? And do you get
what you're doing right there?
Sorry?
Do you know what you're doing right there?
No.
So you're basically being perfectionist about visualization, right? And hello over here, by the way. It's exactly why I know this, because one of the things that really got in the way of one of the many things that got in the way of my journey was this perfectionism around the process itself, around the process of visualization. Oh no, if I haven't reached 100% feeling, seeing, hearing, then I'm not doing it properly. If I haven't got immediate change and really stepped into that feeling of energy, or whatever it is we're asking for, I've not done it properly. And that's not true. Actually, every person, well, for a start, we all have our own primary like sensory kind of experience. So you might be more of a visual person, you might be more of a kinesthetic person, doesn't really matter. But the point is that you're doing it, because the way I talk about it a lot is that, you're just telling your brain where you want it to go. You don't have to connect to it straight away. It could be 5% that you connect to that feeling or that image. It doesn't matter. The more that you do it, your brain will start to take notice of that. So yeah, don't do perfectionism on that.
No, I'm actually, that is right. I do. And what that does is so I don't know if you've heard of the course Primal Trust. I've started doing that, and I'm actually it's at the very beginning, but she's talking a lot about how we actually like self-sabotage, like we're actually set up to self-sabotage, and it's almost like keeping me safe. It wants to keep me, and it sounds so fucked up, but it just does make sense that I'm like almost trying to keep myself from doing it because I don't want to be let down and all of this kind of stuff, which just sounds so crazy. And it's so funny that I just brought up like a concern that there's part of me that thinks it's only me, but then the way you just responded was like, yeah, it's a classic.
It's a classic. And I think what you're saying is right. I think there's obviously, as humans, we have all these fucked up patterns, and it's, that's just what humans do. It's okay. Like, we don't need to beat ourselves up for it. But so I think that's one thing. And I think on the other side of it, which is the side that I often talk about, is if it is a perfectionist pattern, it's also that kind of defeatist part of ourselves, right? Where it's like, and again, it's the same thing, because we're saying, okay, I'm not getting results now, I'm not doing it good enough, so I might as well just not bother.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
Yeah. And I actually did, I do sometimes like solo podcast episodes. I haven't actually released this one yet. And it was kind of like an update on where I'm at. And I was actually really positive about, even though I'm not in a good spot, I was really positive about it because I was like, if I'm being honest with myself, am I being consistent with everything I need to do? I know what I need to do, but am I being consistent? And the answer was like, no, I wasn't being consistent. So I should be really positive about the fact that there's this thing there that I know will work if I can be consistent about it. And I think anyway, a lot of people with chronic illness aren't really honest with themselves in how much they're showing up for it. And maybe they feel like they're doing everything, but are they doing the one thing and they're doing it consistently? If that makes sense.
Yeah, and the paradox is that it's the being hard on ourselves that stops us from showing up, right? Because I think yeah, exactly. And I think part of quite often I'll say to people, just give yourself permission to achieve like 80% of your goal, right? So because when we have this big goal in mind, it's like it just feels so out of reach. And particularly if you're in this kind of really crappy place where you're not feeling good about life, well, it's very hard to motivate yourself. That is the reality. But if you can give yourself permission to just cut yourself some slack and be less than perfect, the paradox is that you're actually going to be more motivated to do what you need to do.
Wow. I've basically now realised I am a perfectionist.
Sorry about that.
No, it's cool. Yeah. I've always been a bit jealous of people when they've gone, oh, I'm a perfectionist. And I've gone, well, I'm not. I'm very happy with, average. But I think it's, I try and I think everyone probably does it. And you were probably doing the same as well. Like you'd set this I set this big plans of doing everything. And then when I have like a couple of days of not doing everything, then I just let it all go because it's not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you just said then. Why am I not happy with just doing 80% of that? That's so right. Wow. Thank you very much for really pointing that, helping.
I mean, I would also say, just as a little tip, like if you're doing brain training as well, the two things that have made a massive difference for me, and I didn't discover these till a lot later down the line, is humor and compassion. So if you're doing active visualizations, bringing humor and compassion into your visualizations are just the best thing for like cutting through self-judgment. Because I think in life we take ourselves so seriously, and again, hello over here. But when you can start to bring humor and compassion to that, it helps you to just let go of the things that don't need attending to, and that's when you see that real shift.
Can you give me an example of what? Because I know what you mean. Like, because I'm always like visualizing this like powerful moment when I'm like running on a beach or something, and it's almost like you could put a soundtrack to it or something, and that's not very funny. And so it's more like, yeah, well, I could if I trip over or something. But like, is it more that you're like with some friends and that you're joking around or something like that? Is that what you mean?
I'll give you an example. I'll tell you something that happens to me basically, and this must be all the brain training that I've done. It just happened quite naturally. So I was on a radio show some time ago, and it was the first episode, and the host said to me, she asked me a question, and I, in my mind, came out of the thing, something that was probably the most ridiculous thing I could have possibly said. So what happened when I hung up the phone? My mind started replaying that incident over and over again, saying, you stupid person, why did you say that? What an idiot, that kind of stuff. And then two things happened. The first thing is that I could almost see myself. So in visualization, you can either imagine you're in it, or you can imagine that you can see yourself as a separate thing. It's disassociation. So I could almost see myself, but it was like I could see myself through this lens of compassion, where I was like, oh, that's Lauren over there. Like, she's just like every other human on the planet. She's doing her best. She doesn't always get it right. That's okay, right? So it's seeing it as part of that mass kind of experience that we all fuck up, basically.
Yeah.
The second thing that happened, which is my favorite, is that I saw myself through the lens of Peep Show. And it sounds kind of weird, but it's like seeing myself through the lens of this comedy sketch where, you watch a comedy sketch and you see people fuck up, and it's hilarious because that is just what we do as humans. Life is a series of fuck ups and comedy moments. And when you can see yourself in that way, it helps you to, you don't ignore mistakes. You take what learnings you need from it, but you can kind of shrug it off and be like, oh, that was a funny experience, move on, so that's kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And for those of you not from the UK, Peep Show looking at it. It's unbelievable. They should really do another series of that. Just actually quickly while you mention it, and that's something that I didn't realize. I put out a story on my Instagram because I was like, oh yeah, I've been doing this part wrong, or maybe not wrong. I look at myself when I visualize. I don't do it through my own eyes, and so now I've been trying to do it in the first person, which is a whole different kettle of fish. What's the what if you're looking at yourself, is that, I'm assuming that is bad because you're disassociating and you can't tap into the feelings as much? Or
it's such a great question. It's something I continue to ask myself. I don't think there's no right or wrong way to do visualization, right? Some people would argue, and what I often, when I'm training people, I will say you want to associate into it, because if you're associated it, you're embodying it, you're feeling it. So technically speaking, that's a more powerful way of connecting. However, for me, and I've found visualizations hard in the past, I sometimes find looking at myself, so disassociating, more powerful, particularly if there's a very strong negative emotion that I'm finding it hard to detach from. So if you step outside of yourself and you can almost see yourself, it just helps to kind of neutralize those negative feelings. And you can use that as a stepping stone, because once you see yourself and you look pretty good, you look like you're having a good time, then you can step into yourself. But the other thing I would say is that, we have these things, which I'm sure you're familiar with, called mirror neurons. And it's this idea that we pick up on and mirror the emotions and behaviors of other people, like neurologically speaking. So she was infectiously happy, he was a mood hoover, that kind of stuff. And my theory is that when you're kind of viewing yourself, there's still an element of that, right? Because when I view Lauren having a great time, I can still feel it in my body. And even if you don't feel it, it doesn't matter, because you're still signposting your brain to where you want it to go. So I would say, basically I would say, just don't analyze it, just do whatever you can do. And I would say practice visualizing being satisfied with your efforts. So that's a more advanced way of using visualization, right? Because you're training yourself out of perfectionism, then you're training yourself into, I did a good visualization there, and I know it's making a difference. And that in itself becomes a bit of a reinforcing kind of loop.
And do you think with I don't know, with the lightning processes, like, I think the difficulty I have always had is because, unlike some people who are going through this, which are, I'm lucky that I'm not like housebound or bedbound where it's the only thing I can do. I have, like, I'm working and I do other stuff, so that actually I find it very difficult to just stop. When I have a negative thought, I'll actually be in the middle of something. It's just like, I don't have the time to do that. Is it, when you're teaching people about this, is there a way of being able to build that in? Like, is that a common thing that people talk about?
When they're getting back into work and life, you mean?
Well, just if they already have, or they've got kids, or, there's just, they're saying that they can't interrupt every thought. Is it, can they just do it like 4 times a day and that will make a difference, or something like that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, it depends on the client. There's loads of things you can do. I would work with someone for up to 4 months after doing the LP. So there's so much stuff you could do that I'd probably drip feed different techniques as time goes, but there's shortcuts you can do stuff in your head. Also, you don't want to get too obsessive, right? You don't want to miss like negative thoughts, but you don't want to get too hung up on sort of acting on every single one. So the best piece of advice I would give someone is what I call which I got from my practitioner, is do and divert. So do a bunch of processes and then divert your attention, and just know that because you can't spend all day doing the lightning process. It just doesn't work out that way. When I was going back to work, I would sort of front and end load my day with the version of the tool itself, and then every time I went to the toilet I would do a process, so because it's very flexible, right? So you can do it in your head. Okay. But again, I think it's very, very key not to get hung up on like, oh no, if I miss negative thought, is that bad? It's not. Like, obviously you want to try where you can, but again, don't be perfectionist about catching those negative thoughts.
Because I'd get to the end of the day and I'd be like, oh my God, I've done it twice. I'm a bad person, or something. So then, as you say, you're like, then that's a negative thing in itself.
For you, I would say, like, if you're going to, I guess if you haven't done the LP, but I think like there's definitely start your day with a really strong visualization. You want to do that. And go really far into the future, because the further into the future you go, the more you're kind of cementing that neurology, because it becomes a familiar, according to your brain, it's becoming a familiar part of how you function, because you've already had, you've created sort of fake memories, if you like. Mm-hmm. And then if you notice thoughts throughout the day, but you can't do anything about it, the simplest thing you could do. So I find, again, in my journey further down the line, I found that detachment is really important. And one of the ways that we can detach is, as crazy as it sounds, is by having a conversation with ourselves, right? So if I notice an anxious thought, I'll imagine that it's this like really excitable little pet that's just sort of looking out for me, because anxiety is just trying to protect you from danger, right? So I'll have a conversation and be like, oh, thanks very much. You know, I know you're trying to look out for me, but you can pipe down now, you can chill out, it's all good. Which, as bonkers as that sounds, what you're training your brain to recognize is that this is not a part of you. It doesn't represent truth, and you don't have to take it seriously. Again, that's another way of bringing humor into this work. Yeah, because you're saying, I don't have to take this seriously. I can just live my life. That would be my tip, probably.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. In terms of, there's a lot of people listening to this, and I'm sure there's some people that would, you know, maybe want to reach out and do the process potentially. I know there are also a lot of people who are listening to this who have spent so much money, and they're probably just trying to collect as much as they can from like free YouTube videos and stuff like that. If there was like a bit of like content or something like that you would pick to, that someone could you know, do for like a fraction of the price, or could do for free, is there anything you know out there that someone could at least get started on doing something? Or is there anything you know of?
Good question. I mean, Curable's brilliant, like, and I'm sure that's come up in conversations before. Curable is a very affordable kind of like app that you can, and it's on Instagram, that you can sort of download, and it gives you lots of, it's much more I mean, in my experience, obviously you're going to get slower changes with it, and it's more subtle, but it's definitely going to get you on the path and get you, and you never know, like it might be, for me, I was one of the more tricky people, so I had to go into the big guns with the LP, but for some people, I think, and a lot of, you know, look at their testimonials, they've got great results, so that could be a good thing. And I don't know, I mean, I have a burnout ebook which doesn't really give answers, but it makes people aware of what some of their patterns are, which is part of the start of that journey, right, is understanding where you need to make changes. But Curable is a brilliant one. Thank you so much for that. I know it's difficult because you know, so there could be a certain course that heals, you know, a certain amount of people, and there's always going to be people that, you know, it doesn't, you know, certain things don't work for. And I think it's just what I've talked about on the podcast. I think there's people sometimes who get, because everyone I speak to really is a practitioner who's telling their story, but then are helping people, and people always get a little bit triggered, just like, oh, I don't necessarily need to go and take their course. And I'm like, it's not about that. It's about just offering, you know, making people aware of what's out there, and also just, but I know that one of my good friends' brothers, actually, he recovered from the lightning process, and we've had loads of people on here. We know I do like the fact that it is quite like an intense thing at the beginning, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's quite unique compared to, do you do it in person, or is it on Zoom now? I mean, I offer it in person, but a lot of my clients are sort of from around the UK, so I haven't really had any demand for it in person. It's all online at the moment. I would say, can I just go back to that? Actually, there is one other person I'd recommend, actually, for people, particularly with chronic health issues, and they may already know him, but David Hamilton, he is absolutely brilliant, and he started out life in the pharmaceutical industry and basically recognized this thing we call the placebo, and I was like, why aren't we looking into this more? So he went off into the mind-body connection. He's done a lot of work around kindness and the relationship of yourself, and the kind of the scientific kind of benefits of that. But he now has this thing called the Personal Development Club, which is like, I'm signed up to it. It's a tenner a month. It's brilliant. And he talks a lot. The thing that I like about him is he gives practical tools, practical tips, actual visualizations that you can use. And he also talks a lot about the research and the science. And I think a lot of, again, hello over here, and people that I work with have very analytical minds. They want that evidence. They want that rationale of why we're doing what we're doing. So I would definitely recommend him, actually, as well. So it's fairly affordable.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I'll definitely look at David Hamilton, did you say?
He's brilliant.
And just a last bit of, I guess, advice, or no, just wisdom, I guess, like looking back on this now, like looking at your career before, the career you've gone into, like how different your life is now. Would you say that there's elements of your life now, or a big part of your life maybe, that is better as a result of what you've been through? Like, can you look back on that now with hindsight? How is your life different as a result of what you've been through?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's that whole thing around post-traumatic growth, isn't it? You know, people say, I would never wish that on anyone else, but actually, I would never change it for the world. And I would never change what I've been through for the world. I mean, I wouldn't, yeah. And again, I wouldn't wish it on anyone else, but it's given me so many learnings about myself and about the experience of life, and just that ability to be less than perfect and to enjoy life for what it is. It's changed my life in immeasurable ways, really.
And we did kind of touch upon it before, but like for someone listening to this right now who is going through that really tough time and can't see a way out, what would be your advice to them at this moment?
Just don't ever lose hope. You know, like look around you, look at other people who have recovered, look at go on to TED Talks, find stories of inspiration, find other stories of people who've gone through hardship and come out the other side, because it may seem it's just another story, but actually your brain needs that evidence. And also know that recovery is not a linear journey, and that's okay. Like, it doesn't, just because you have a bad day, don't put that down to this is the way it is now, right? That everything is changing. Your nervous system is always changing. And you absolutely have the ability to influence that. So just keep the hope and keep searching for those stories.
Yeah, that's great advice. I was actually, again, I said something in this solo episode that I've now kind of, I've rejigged my thinking in terms of if I have a bad day or if I have like a real setback, I haven't like undone all the good work. And I think that's something that I used to think like, oh, well, I've just gone, I've undone it, all the good work. And I think that's kind of what you were saying then.
Yeah, just keep telling your brain to look for the good that you're doing and focus on the effort, not the outcome, right? Focus on the process, not the outcome, because it's about celebrate. I don't want to sound too cheesy here, but it is about celebrating yourself and recognizing what you are doing well. And the more you can do that, the more you will find of that as well.
I'm going to write that down. I've been writing things, as cheesy as it sounds. I've been writing things and putting them next to my mirror so I can like goals and stuff, but then also just little inspiring things. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. If people wanted to reach out to you, connect with you, work with you, like how would they best connect with you or reach out to you?
I am on Instagram and I also have a website. So it's laurenstoney.co.uk is my website.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much for coming on and sparing your morning. Hopefully the weather gets better there soon. It's why I left, but thank you so much I can't wait to get this out to people. I know they'll get so much from it.
Lovely. Well, thanks for having me, and take care.